Okay. All right. Shabbat Shalom. We are going to be continuing on with uh, our slow and steady movement through the Torah, the Torah. Let me get our little. I need some music. I tell you what, I need some little intro music for these. Okay, just hold on one second here. Get this thing. Okay, good. I'm glad that it updated. All right, as soon as we get this thing started here, get ready to go. All right, there. Oh, what's this? Okay. All right. Okay, we are getting into our weekly Midrash. Today we are going to be dealing with the vow, the Nazarite vow. Okay, we're going to be talking about the Nazarite vow. Okay. The Nazarite vow. We're looking at Numbers chapter 6, verses 1 through 21. Virtually the entire chapter of Numbers chapter 6 is dealing with the Nazarite vow. There's a few, the Aaronic blessing is also in Numbers chapter 6, but that will be for next week. Yeah. This week we'll be dealing exclusively with the Nazarite vow. Okay. So we'll begin by reading these 21 verses. And then we will go ahead and deal with some key points in the text. Okay. You could just read this. Read it from there.
And Yahweh spoke to Moshe, saying, Speak to the children of Israel, and say to them, when a man or a woman does separate by making a vow of a Nazarite to be separate to Yahweh, he separates himself from wine and strong drink. He drinks neither vinegar or wine, nor vinegar of strong drink. Neither does he drink any grape juice, nor eat grapes or raisins. All the days of his separation he does not eat whatever is made of the grapevine, from seed to skin. All the days of the vow of his separation a razor does not come upon his head until the days are completed for which he does separate himself to Yahweh. He is set apart. He shall let the locks of the hair of his head grow long. All the days of his all of the days of his separation to Yahweh, he does not go near a dead body. He does not make himself unclean for his father, or for his mother, or for his brother or his sister. When they die, because his separation of Elohim is on his head, all the days of his separation he is set apart to Yahweh. And when anyone dies beside him in an instant suddenly, and he has defiled the head of his separation. Then he shall shave his head on the day of his cleansing. On the 7th day he shaves it. On the 8th day he brings 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons to the priest to the door of the tent of appointment. And the priest shall prepare one as sin offering and the other as an ascending offering, and shall make atonement for him because he sinned by reason of the dead body. And he shall set apart his head on that day, and shall separate it, and shall separate to Yahweh the days of his separation, and shall bring a male lamb or a year-old as a guilt offering. But the former days are not counted because his separation was defiled. And this is the Torah of the Nazarite. When the days of his separation are completed, he is brought to the door of the tent of appointment. And he shall bring his offering to Yahweh, 1 male lamb, a year old, a perfect one, as an ascending offering, and the 1 ewe lamb, a year old, a perfect one, as a sin offering, and 1 ram, a perfect one, as a peace offering, and a basket of unleavened bread, cakes or of fine flour mixed with oil, and unleavened thin cakes anointed with oil, and their grain offering with their drink offerings. And the priest shall bring them before Yahweh and prepare his sin offering and his ascending offering. And he shall prepare the ram as a slaughtering of peace offerings to Yahweh, together with the basket of unleavened bread. And the priest shall prepare its grain offering and its drink offering. And the Nazarite shall shave the head of his separation at the door of the tent of appointment, and shall take the hair from the head of his separation, and shall put it on the fire which is under the slaughtering of the peace offerings. And the priest shall take the boiled shoulder of the ram, and 1 unleavened cake from the basket, and 1 unleavened thin cake, and put them upon the hands of the Nazarite after he has shaved his hair of separation. Then the priest shall wave them a wave offering before Yahweh. It is set apart for the priest, besides the breast of the wave offering, and besides the thigh of the contribution. And afterwards the Nazarite of drink wine, and afterwards the Nazarite shall drink wine. This is the Torah of the Nazarite who vows to Yahweh the offering of his separation, and besides that, whatever else his hand is able to provide according to the vow which he takes. So he shall do according to the Torah of his separation.
Okay. All right. Very good. Thank you very much. So, we are going to be looking at here a few keywords. We're going to deal with a few keywords in the text and try to see if we can get a bit of an understanding as to what is going on, different significances that we can find inside of the actual language. We'll look at what this meant for the ancestors in terms of this vow that was taken. We'll look at some spiritual significances and applications, and we'll also look at some connections in the apostolic writings, the New Testament, so-called New Testament writings. Okay, so what we want to look at is we want to deal with mainly the first two verses here. What's uh, of Numbers chapter 6, where it says, "And Yahweh spake unto Moses, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel, and say unto them, When either a man or a woman shall separate themselves to vow a vow of a Nazarite, to separate themselves unto Yahweh." We want to deal with this beginning parts here. Find our key words here inside of these two verses. Okay. This is basically the second half of that second verse, dealing with the fact that it says here, shall separate themselves to vow a vow of a Nazarite, to separate themselves unto Yahweh. We're dealing with these words here in the Hebrew text, right? So first of all, we'll deal with this idea of separation, right? This idea of separation, which would be here, Yafle, Yafle, right here. We're going to look at that. To separate, right? This word separate, you think about separation, you have the separation of the yolk from the whites, right? Fala, separate. Pala.
Is this the word for separate?
Separate, yes.
So it's not Nazar.
It's actually pala.
Okay.
Separate. Okay, so this word separate here, the Hebrew word, Strong's Hebrews 6381, pala, properly, perhaps to separate, that is, distinguish, literally or figuratively, distinguish, making a distinction between things, by implication, to be causatively make, great, difficult, wonderful, right? When thinking about causatively making something wonderful, right? You can see the idea of distinguishing there. If I take, if I take a picture, say a painting, two identical paintings. One is just black and white, and the other one is colorful. I put different colors in the details, right? I would be distinguishing one from the other. How they essentially would be the same, but I'm making a distinction between the other by giving it more details. I'm making it more wonderful, right? I'm making it more great. I'm separating it, right? So when we look at that, we can see these kind of ideas in this word, pala. Again, according to the word study dictionary, the complete word study dictionary, pala, we can see is a verb meaning to do something wonderful, again, to do something extraordinary or difficult, right? So it's not only a separation, a distinction, a setting apart of a particular thing, right? But it also has to do with the quality, of the thing, right? So it goes, it's different from just taking two things and moving one thing to one side and moving another thing to another side, there is this idea of wonderfulness that is included in it. A rare use of this Hebrew word expresses the performance of a special vow beyond the ordinary commitment, right? And that's what we're dealing with here in terms of the Nazarite vow. You see it here, Numbers 6:2. That's what we're looking at here, right? So we see here is dealing with this special vow beyond the ordinary commitment.
That's why it's extraordinary.
Yes, extraordinary. Okay, so a vow, right? What?
It's a pinky promise.
Yes, a vow, right? If we go back, thinking about our verse, right? The part we were dealing with we shall separate those ones, the man or the woman shall separate themselves to vow a vow, right? So we want to deal with this idea of vowing a vow, right? Because that's what we say, see in the Hebrew here. This word here is nadar. To vow. And just like Hiskey said here, looking at the picture, dealing with that pinky promise, the word nadar is a primitive root to promise, positively to do or give something to Elohim or to make a vow, right? So when we think about the idea of vowing or promising or making oaths, or a promise, right? We also can think about what the words of Yeshua when he deals with the idea of, letting your yays be yay and your nays be yay. When you say a thing, when you speak a thing, in righteousness, you actually are promising a thing, right? But here we have the idea of actually making a promise, making a vow, saying a thing, speaking something into existence, right? It's not just vain words, right? Nothing that we say should be actually dealing with vain words. But here we're dealing with actually making this vow, where we see, of course, later on when Yeshua is dealing with us in terms of us walking out righteousness, he's saying that our very words, the things that come out of our mouth when we speak them, should be as a vow. I don't have to sit up here and say that I'm, go through this process of this this thing and say, I am doing this, and maybe I'll say the thing that I'm doing 7 times to kind of solidify it, or so on and so forth. But our words should be as strong as this vow, as a promise. So here, this vow that's being made is, of course, being made unto Elohim, which, of course, strengthens things that much more. Nadar. Right? So when we look at this word further, nadar, a verb meaning to vow, the verbal concept denotes the making of an oral, voluntary promise to give or do something as an expression of consecration or devotion to the service of Elohim. Jacob vowed to return 1/10 of all that Elohim bestowed on him if Elohim will protect and preserve him on his journey. And we see that over in Genesis 28:20. Right? So when we see an example of this nadar, this idea of making a verbal expression of something, an action that you would be doing, a promise unto Yahweh, right? So again, thinking about this in terms of separating yourself and making this vow, this promise, this verbal promise, this verbal expression of consecration unto the Most High. You know, this is part of the thing that's going on when you're doing this vow, this Nazarite vow, right? So this is a serious thing. It's not just like, you know, I might go ahead and do this thing or whatever, right? This is you're going about it like you're doing it, right? That thing is getting put into action. Now, again, when we think back about to the, let me go back here to the verses we're looking at here. Verse 2, again, shall separate themselves to vow, nadar, that says lendor, nadar. Okay, so to vow, this is to vow, what? A vow, right? So you're making a promise. I'm promising to promise, right? So it's doubling up on this idea, just like we see it in the English themselves, to vow a vow. You're making a promise of a promise, right? So it's dealing with the thing that you're doing, and it's dealing with what it is, right? So if we look over here back, we'll move back up to where we were here, because again, we're seeing this word in two forms here, nadar and nader, which is basically the same word, but used in two forms, right? This would be the masculine noun here, meaning vow. So before we had it in its in the verb tense, in regards to actually doing a thing, right? We see it here in the verb tense, nadar, to be doing a thing, right? And then when we move forward to the second usage of this particular word, we see it in its noun tense, right? So we see both the verb and the noun usage of the same word here, nun dalit resh, nader. So vowing a vow, right? Here we're dealing with the word which is found 25 times in the Old Testament and basically means a solemn promise to Elohim or the thing promised. Several times the word refers to the specific words given in a vow. The word is used to describe the object or intent of the vows. And here, what we're looking at here is the intent here is the Nazarite vow, right? All of the things that are included in the Nazarite vow, which we'll be looking at, momentarily here. Okay, so the vow that's vowed is, of course, the Nazarite vow. That word in the Hebrew is Nazir. Nazir.
See how what I was saying about the word for separate?
Yes, and you were absolutely correct in thinking that, because the idea of separation is, basically the primary understanding of the word that's translated as Nazarite. The word Nazir literally means separate. That is consecrated. Hence, figuratively from the latter, an unpruned vine. We'll get back to this idea in a few here. This idea of this unpruned vine, like an unshorn Nazarite, separated, or vine undressed. Right. So again, this word here, Nazarite, which is describing the vow, the noun tense of the word vow is described. Our description of that is here, this vow, what of separation, this vow of consecration, this vow of set apartness, right? So you're vowing, you're promising a promise of separation.
Whoa.
Right? So this is what's going on here, right? You're separating yourself. You're separating yourself to promise a promise of separation.
There's a lot of separation.
That's what's going on here, right? So, and then when we look at these things, right, you have the pala word here that we see inside of here. This is just kind of the prefix here. This is basically dealing with, because of the fact that when the man or the woman does it, this is giving you the idea of they actually here, because it's kind of it's dealing with the man or the woman, right? So this is just that prefix of this word here again. When they separate to a vow, a vow of promise. All right, so let's go back up here to what we're dealing with in terms of where were we here. Okay.
So it's like a lot of separate.
It's
separate, the vow, a promise of separation.
Yes. All right. Okay, so also what we want to look at actually is, again, let me look this up real quick as we keep going through here. Chapter 6, verse 2. Okay, again, so that verse 2 is dealing with, we looked at separate themselves to vow of a Nazarite. Mm-hmm. And then the purpose at the end is to separate, right? So you're separating to a vow, you're separating to vow a vow of separation to separate. And this is what we see in what's going on here. I'm going to separate to vow a vow of separation to separate. And that last separate is, it's just another form of Natsir, which was what's translated as Nazarite, Natsir. You have another form of that word, Natsar, the verb meaning to dedicate, to consecrate. And the causative form, it can denote to separate or to refrain from something, or to take on the obligations of a Nazarite, right?
So it's interesting that even the word Nazarite, word Nazarite means separate or separation. Someone who is separate, and it's to separate.
Right.
So it's like he's saying it like 3 times in that one verse, separate. Like
right.
3 times.
Right. Which and again we dealing with the idea of a consecration. So the individual is a consecrated individual. He's a set apart individual. There are things that he is setting his or herself apart from in who he has become because of the promise that he has made. Right. So we see when we think about the idea of this Nazarite vow, is primarily, again, dealing with this idea of separation, of consecration, of set apartness, right? Okay, so this Nazarite then will be, he or she shall separate himself from what? From the grapevine, from the cutting of hair, from the razor, right? And from defilement. And it's specifically spoken of in the command, defilement from dead bodies. Okay. So again, the Nazarite, the one who takes on the promise of separation, is separate from the grapevine, the razor, the cutting of hair, and from defilement, specifically of dead bodies. So let's look at these individually here. Okay, dealing with this idea of nothing from the grapevine, right? From the seed to the skins. From the seed to the skins.
Why does he gotta like make it extra?
It's just it's totally clear and it's totally comprehensive in
no grapes.
Period. Nothing from the vine.
Take the skin off and eat the skin and leave the pulp.
Right. Nothing. Nothing that comes from the grape, right? No wine, no strong drink, no vinegar, no grape juice, no fresh or dried grapes, no juice, no grape, no raisins, no nothing that comes from the grape. Why not? Why not? What's wrong with eating grapes? Like, we can understand the idea perhaps of wine and strong drinks, right? But I can't. Why not the juice though?
But can they, if they could have like alcohol?
No,
grain alcohol,
strong drink.
It says no strong drink.
Yeah, no strong drink.
Oh,
it says wine or strong
wine
drink.
and strong drink.
Mm-hmm.
So even wheat.
So, but I'm saying that's understandable though. If you're thinking about this idea of this consecration unto the Most High, it's understandable to think of the idea of a abstaining from wine and strong drink. But I'm saying What about just a raisin?
He always said so.
He says because Yahweh said so, which is it's an excellent answer. There's nothing wrong with that answer.
You
But
can understand that concept,
right, children understand that idea perfectly. But I think that sometimes it can be helpful when we think about it just a little bit more. Right? So we can see here. Let's see what this commentary has to say as to potentially something we can be looking at in terms of why. Okay, so the design of this prohibition can hardly have been merely that by abstaining from intoxicating drink, the Nazarite might preserve perfect clearness and temperance of mind, like the priest when engaged in their duties, and so conduct themselves as one sanctified to the master. Okay, so basically he's dealing with the idea if we say this is just dealing with the idea of intoxication, again, we can understand this because the Nazarite would be dealing with, if he was just simply abstaining from intoxicating drink, he will be preserving perfect clearness and temperance of mind, right? But it goes much further and embraces entire absence from all this this has to do with just this is like a great some technical Greek thought of what grapes are, by which holiness could be impaired. Vinegar, fresh and dry grapes, and food prepared from grapes and raisins, ergo raisin cakes. Raisin cakes are not intoxicating, but grape cakes, as being the dainties sought after by epicures and debauchees, are cited in Hosea 3:1 as a symbol of the sensual attractions of idolatry, a luxurious kind of food that was not in harmony with the solemnity of the worship of Yahweh. So when we look at these things that people did at the time with raisins, with grapes, as being almost kind of like this kind of delicacy,
We're talking about raisins?
Yeah, they made these special raisin cakes. Culturally speaking, look up Hosea 3:1. Read that for us. And as you're finding that, you think about when you watch these old time movies, when you see the man laying back in his little couch kind of a thing, and you have these ladies standing over them and they're feeding him grapes.
But like when I think about grapes, I think about how at the feast times, like it talks about the grapes being joy.
Right.
The grapes and wine.
Right. They're joy. Just kind of just luxurious kind of food. Right. Not necessarily that it's a bad thing, but there is a connection. There's a connection with what people do in terms of there being a symbol of the sensual attractions of idolatry, but it's also this luxurious kind of food. It's what I'm saying in terms of when you see the depictions of these rich people sitting here being fed with grapes. What does Hosea 3:1 say?
Then Yahweh said to me, "Go again, love a woman loved by a friend, and an adulteress according to the love of Yahweh. For the children of Israel, though they are turning to other mighty ones and love their raisin cakes."
And love their raisin cake.
Right. So again, when you think about sin and iniquity in general, it's dealing with doing things that in and of themselves might not necessarily be something that is evil per se, but it's kind of just doing things inordinately or dealing with things in an over abundant kind of a way, right? So when we think about the idea of grapes and these things from the vine, they can give us this idea of these of sensual attractions, where when we look at these idols, right, these idols and things, a lot of times, part of idol worship is dealing with things that are connected with these sensual attractions. So looking at the grapes, looking at the vine is giving you this this idea of separation from these physical desires and attractions, right? The Nazarite was to avoid everything that proceeded from the vine because its fruit was regarded as the sum and substance of all sensual enjoyments, right? Just because it's giving you, you have this individual who's set apart unto Yahweh, where his sole purpose was in this dedication to Yahweh. So this person who was doing over and above what it was that was then over and above what the regular, I would say, individual was doing, he's going over and above that, and he's dealing with only doing things unto Yahweh. What was you gonna say, Hiski? Oh, you were just saying that you had found the verse. Okay, good. Okay. We have this other commentary here that says, abstain from drinking it, it being wine, any of it, not only from an immoderate or excessive drinking of it, which every man should abstain from, but from drinking of it at all, that he might be free, more free, and fit for the service of Elohim, for prayer, for meditation, reading the scriptures, and attendance on the worship of Elohim in all its branches, and be less liable to temptations to sin. For as Abin Ezra observes, who's actually a middle-age commentator, many transgressions are occasioned by wine, which, if drank immoderately, intoxicates the mind and unfits for religious duties, excites lust, and leads on to many vices. So it's easy for us to think about why one would abstain from the drinking again of the intoxications. But again, when we think about the Nazarite vow, again, is dealing with anything that even is remotely connected to grapes, on any level. Okay. So next it says, he shall let the locks of his hair on his head grow long. Right? So
like dreadlocks.
Well, I guess it could be like that. People who have hair like us, if you never cut it or comb it, doesn't say anything about combing it. You can comb it, but if you didn't comb it, it's going to turn into locks. That's just what happens. Whether it's it's more so you have to be a little more kind of diligent about the connectedness of it, I guess, the straighter your hair is. The curlier it is, the more it wants to twist around and turn into a big, large rope. Okay, but again, why? Why? What is, where, what is it that we see that in the idea of, a razor touching one's head? We think about set apartness, consecratedness, sanctification. Um, what is it about the razor touching the head? Well, one thought. I'm going to Albert, good old Albert.
Well, I mean, I would think that. I mean, I think about Samson whenever his hair got cut off, took away his strength.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm just saying that's what happened. So
That actually is what happened.
I don't know if there's any connection though.
Well, again, according to this commentator here, among the Jews, the abundance of the hair was considered to betoken physical strength and perfection. We're able to compare 2 Samuel 14. What's this say? What's 2 Samuel 14, 25 through 26 say? $14.
I got it.
Yes, go ahead.
But in all Israel, there was none to be so much praised as Absalom for his beauty. From the sole of his foot even to the crown of his head, there was no blemish on him. And when he pulled his head, for it was at every year's end that he pulled it, because the hair was heavy on him. Therefore he pulled it. He weighed his hair of his head at 200 shekels after the king's weight.
Right. Talking about his hair, right? Absalom, the son of David, who, was this token of strength and perfection, right? And part of that was, dealing with his hair. Okay, so if we go on, and baldness was regarded as a grave blemish. Thus, the free growth of the hair on the head of the Nazarite represents the dedication of the man with all his strength and powers to the service of Elohim. So when we think about the growth of the hair as being kind of this representation, right? It's this thing that's kind of giving you this sign of strength and, and power and beauty given by the Most High, and also given as a sign or a picture of the reliance of the individual to allow the growth from Yahweh. Again, this thing with hair, we talked about some of this last week. This thing with hair, and it being this kind of picture, of things. And here we see it being, showing, what the Most High supplies the man or the woman here who is.
What did we talk about last week?
Huh?
What did we talk about last week?
in regards to hair, we talked about the idea of the covering,
Oh, the cover.
right, and the loosening of the hair, the letting down of the hair, of the beauty, of the glory, right? And in the woman's case, that thing, is, belonging to her husband, right? But in the Nazarites case, dealing with the man or the woman, again, it's just kind of this representation of the vow, right? Okay. So, all the days of his separation to Yahweh, his or her separation, again, this was something that a man or a woman could enter into. He does not go near a dead body. He does not go near a dead body, right? It talks about the defilement that comes with
It's like the same
a dead
level
body.
as the high priest, right? He can't even go for his family.
Yeah, we'll look at that in just a few. But in terms of dealing with the idea of why, when we think about the Nazarite, it's really a picture of the spiritual elite, right? The Nazarite is going above and beyond the not the regular kind of the requirements of holiness, right? He's going a step further. Not like the priests where they they're obligated in regards to their who they are in terms of their birth. They're obligated to do it. They do it because of that's who they are. That's where they were born into. But the Nazarite, is making a decision, is making a conscious decision and choice to do more, to draw closer to Yahweh, right? The Nazarite's level of holiness, set apartness, was second to none. Second to none. The Nazarite's level of holiness and set apartness, his consecratedness, was
second to none is one.
Second to none. What?
I said the second to none is one.
The second to none is one. That is correct.
So he's level 1.
Yeah, right. He's level 1 of holiness. The Nazarite is, right? Now you said the Nazarite was on par with the priest in regards to holiness, but we see that the Nazarite is actually more, right? The priest, and look at Leviticus chapter 21 because we can compare.
It's right
here. Yeah, Leviticus chapter 21.
21:20.
So when we look at the priest was not able to have wine on duty. He was able to drink wine, but he just wasn't able to be on duty and drink wine. Nazarite, no wine at all.
Or grapes.
Or grapes, period.
Because the priest could have some grapes.
He could have grapes, but he was only restricted from having wine while he performed his duties.
He could have wine on the weekend.
Yeah. All right. But the Nazarite could not even have grapes. He couldn't even have the thing that you made wine with.
Or the skin or the seed.
Right. None of that.
Or raisins.
Right. So let's see if we go down to Leviticus 21.
20.
Huh? How'd you?
How'd I get there? I was looking at it.
Wow. Not 20. 21.
Okay.
We want to look at 21 verse. Hold on one second. Hold on one second. I should have had this ready to go here. Chief among people, baldness, offerings made by fire, and his wife, sanctify, daughter. Okay, is it in 21? Okay, I'm gonna have to go. I'm gonna have to find that. But in the meantime, we see that the priests, it says here, I was looking for where it talks about the drinking of wine for the priest. Yeah, find that for me. Okay, so while you're finding that, we look at the next thing here. The priest can only be defiled by nearest of kin, right? The priest, it says, and we go to 21, verse 1.
Now, that was Leviticus chapter 10, verse 9.
Oh, yeah. With Nadab and Abihu, right?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm looking in the wrong place. What is that?
Do not drink wine or strong drink, you nor your sons with you, when you go into the tent of appointment, lest you die a law forever.
Okay, very good.
So it's when you go into the tent.
Right. So we see there that the Nazarites' level of holiness in regards to the partaking of wine or strong drink, his level is higher. When we look over at Leviticus 21, verse 1, it says, "And Yahweh spake unto Moses, speak unto the priests, the sons of Aaron," right? Dealing with those that are in line for the role of the high priest. "There shall none be defiled for the dead among his people, but for his kin that is near unto him, that is his mother, father, son, his daughter, or for his brother, or for his sister that was a virgin, that is nigh unto him, which have no husband. For her may he be defiled, but he shall not defile himself, being a chief among men, among his people, to profane himself." Right? So in terms of defilement of the priest, it could be for their nearest relatives only.
And then what? The high priest.
Well, that's what we was looking at. The sons of Aaron. That's who's that talking about?
Well, but I'm talking about as far as the high priest.
The high priest, individual, verse 15. That's not. The high priests do not defile themselves by permitting their families to. Okay, that's that. The high priest over their head. When I see the high priest, I don't know who the high priest is other than the sons of Aaron.
Can you hand me that ginger ale? Oh, here. Give me the rest. Where'd you get this from? Ew, what the hell is all that?
That would be
On the rim.
1 verse 11.
Verse 11, neither shall he go into any dead body nor defile himself. Okay, right. And he said the high priest, verse 10 and 11, and he that is the high priest among his brethren upon him. So that's dealing with that one individual who's actually functioning as the high priest, not just those that were. So when we look at verses 1 through 4, is dealing with those who could be eligible as the high priest, who would be the sons of Aaron. But verse 10 and 11 is dealing with the actual one of those that was actually functioning at that time, and he that is the high priest among his brethren, upon whose head the anointing oil was poured, and that is consecrated to put on the garments, shall not uncover his head, for nor run his clothes. In terms of the process of going through the mourning process, right? What they would do in terms of uncovering their head and running their clothes. Neither shall he go into any dead body, nor defile himself for his father or for his mother. Right, so the one actually functioning as the high priest, they're not able to be defiled, because they're actually functioning as the high priest. So you're dealing with one individual, the high priest, who again was really the picture of holiness unto the people in regards to his holiness. But again, the Nazarite was on par with the high priest in regards to his holiness, because he was not able to be defiled either at all. Didn't matter if it was father, mother, sister, brother, whatever.
And the Torah makes it clear that they give these examples of nearest relatives, mother, father,
right. So none of that was. So again, he is on par, and in some regards, a higher level of holiness. Which again, the difference being is that the priest, this was his obligation because of his bloodline. The Nazarite, he just chose that. He chose that level of sanctity, willfully, of his own volition, right? The priest, it says, can't make baldness or shave the corners of the beard, right? So when we think about the idea of making baldness or shaving, is not necessarily the idea of cutting is still there, but it's the severity of the cutting, right? You're not making baldness. You're not destroying the borders, right? So there's cutting, but there's limits to the cutting in regards to the priest. With the Nazarite, there's no cutting. There's no cutting at all. Verse 5. Leviticus 21, verse 5. They shall not make baldness upon their head, neither shall they shave off the corner of their beard, nor make any cuttings in their flesh. So again, we're talking about shaving off the corners of the beard. It's talking about the borders, or the edges. So again, that's not dealing with cutting it down, but that's dealing with cutting it off. So again, we're talking about the severity of the cuts. And with the Nazarite, he's not doing at all. Right? He's just not cutting, period. So again, we see that there are ways in which the Nazarite, has things that he is doing out of obligation, out of his personal obligation, um, that is more so than what the high priest was doing, right? So the Nazarite vow shows the regular person that there is a higher level of righteousness to be attained. However, this higher level does come at a price.
I was just thinking about how if someone felt a certain kind of way, African, if someone felt a certain kind of way, about, they're not part of Levi, and they can't be a priest or whatever, they still are able to separate themselves unto Yahweh if they really want to.
Yes, this vow of the Nazarite was for the man or the woman. It was for the regular person who wanted to up their holiness levels.
What do you think about it being for the woman too?
Well, it says it's man or the woman. It says it right there.
So it's not respecter. It's not a respecter of
the woman was able to vow the vow of the Nazarite as well. Again, it was just for the regular person. It was for everyone, irregardless of your bloodline.
By the bathroom over there.
If you decided to make that vow, make that promise of separation unto Yahweh, there was things that there was things that you needed to do, but it was irrespective of you being a man or a woman. It was for anyone, which makes it more open, because there's no such thing as a woman priest, right? Even if you was a Levite, if you was a Levite woman, you could never be a priest. But you could be a Nazarite. You could take the Nazarite vow, but again, it comes at a price.
I have a question.
So, how much? What is the price?
I have a question. Can you hear me?
What comes with it? What did it cost?
Hello?
We want to deal with that a little bit. What did it cost? Well, we see in the the separation, right? It dealt with self-sacrifice. There was things that you had to abstain from. We talked about the idea of the grape, the fruit of the vine, really being a picture of the physical desires. It really being a picture of these things that were sensual things that you were doing simply out of just pleasure. When you think about the spies going into the land of Canaan, one of the things that they talked about grabbing was these grapes, these big, huge grapes that it took 2 people to carry out a branch of these grapes, right? These big, succulent, juicy grapes, right? Showing the yes, it does. Showing the fertility of the land of Canaan, showing the awesomeness that was in the land, and showing what you would be able to enjoy in the land. So this thing that was pictured as, the kind of the epitome of enjoyment going into the very promised land, this individual who made this promise of separation was, in doing that, in the making of this promise, was setting himself or herself apart from the epitome of self enjoyment, right? So we see that this, one of the things it cost was this self sacrifice.
I don't like when mom said that when you obey, and you have to obey to your parents when you want to do something, and mom or dad says don't do that, you're sacrificing what you really want to do, but you can't do it.
Right.
So you probably want to have some of them grapes.
But also, I think when we think about the idea, when we think about this other thing that it costs, when we think about discipline, right, it has to at some point go from the fact of not just being a thing that you want to do, but you don't do it. But when you go into discipline, I think it has to get into the place where you don't want to do the thing and eat anymore.
So like, you conquered your flesh.
Right, where the appetite is now changing. Where it's different from, I have an appetite for something, but I'm not going to eat it. But when we talking and when we talk about discipline, it seems should get you to the place where the appetite is actually being altered. Because of the fact that I realize that, because I made this particular promise that some particular things aren't for me anymore, having that realization, it seems with discipline should get you to the place where eventually, that taste goes away. That appetite for a particular thing is gone.
That's what happens when people come to Torah from, if they wasn't born in it. You think about that in regards to food, in regards to pagan practices.
Right.
But for this person who these things are on limits normally for them, but because they made a choice to take this vow, now they have to be disciplined in their desires.
Right.
Because if they're a Nazarite and all they doing is thinking about drinking some wine,
or not doing it,
not drinking some wine, you're not really separating yourself unto Yahweh, because all you're thinking about is the act that you're missing out on.
Exactly.
And that kind of gives me some thoughts for Day of Atonement. If all you're doing is thinking about the next meal and the fact that you're hungry, then you're not really fasting unto Yahweh.
Which is an excellent point, because when you think about the whole point of it in the first place is you're doing this separating unto Yahweh. So if all you're doing is thinking about the things that you can't have, then you're only thinking about really is yourself.
Your carnal appetite.
Right. You're only thinking about your own self if you're only thinking about, what you're not able to do rather than what you're doing it for, which is you're doing it unto Yahweh. Right. So that, I would say, enters in the idea of dedication, the purpose, the reason behind it, the reasoning behind it. The reason, the thing that's going to give you the stick-to-itiveness is the fact that you're doing it unto Yahweh, right? The fact that this thing is unto the creators, unto the one who actually made you, is really the driving force, the thing that's allowing you to move forward in this, right? But again, dealing with the idea of what it costs, the motivation must be Yahweh, right? You don't take this vow. You don't take this vow because of your need to be holy, right? Because you're not separating yourself unto yourself. You're separating yourself unto the Most High. You want to be closer to the Most High. This is the reason why you're doing it in the first place. So when we think about the idea of dedication, motivation, the why in it, it must be Yahweh. But we got to think about what comes with it. What comes with this thing? Isolation. Isolation is something that comes with this vow. The Nazarite had to really be thoughtful about his surroundings. He couldn't be around old people that could die at any minute. He couldn't be in places where there were people fighting to potentially to the death.
So he couldn't be in war, and he can't be in
He couldn't be in war. He couldn't be in war and be partaking of this vow, because somebody can die right next to him. He could kill somebody, right? He couldn't be defiled by the dead, right? So he had to set up, things to guard him from becoming defiled. He probably want to be in situations where there were people who were doing things that would be things that would tempt him into doing things, being around people who are indulging in a little grape juice, in some intoxicating drink, right? He probably had to set himself apart from certain things in order to maintain his sanctity. So what can we see in terms of spiritual / now applications of this Nazarite vow? First thing we see is going beyond the bare minimum, right? We can't look at the scriptures. We can't look at this way of life. We can't look at whatever it is that we think our requirements are as followers of Yeshua and say, I'm able to just do, the bare minimum and get by. When we look at the picture that is drawn for us by the Nazarite and that Nazarite vow, we see that there is a desire for an individual to, and again, not for selfish reasons, because again, this is something that could literally cause isolation. If I know that I'm not able to be defiled by my nearest relatives, there's a possibility that I have to isolate myself from my nearest relatives so that there can be kind of a separation that kind of eases the or alters my connectedness to them. Because again, when we talk about the idea of what you do whenever you go through this mourning process. Again, we looked at what happened with the priest, with the uncovering of the head and the renting of the clothes, right? The mourning process is as if you can't be moved by these things, right? And so this is one of the things that was kind of taken on by the Nazarite, going above and beyond the what the quote unquote regular person was doing. Self-denial of carnal desires and pleasures. Right? Again, the Nazarite was separating himself from this specific thing, which was the fruit of the vine. He was separating himself from this specific thing, but it gave you a picture of carnal desires and pleasures. Right? So when we seek to draw closer and do more for the Most High, going above and beyond, like what we see pictured with the Nazarite, is again giving us the picture of self-denial, right? When we think about how we can apply this vow, this promise to our lives, self-denial of carnal desires and pleasures is a serious thing in regards to our life with Yeshua, right? When we look at the writings of Paul, the carnal mind cannot be subject unto the laws of the Spirit. When we have a life that's supposed to be dictated by the Ruach HaKodesh, it can't, we can't be in a place where, when we're thinking about our carnal desires and our carnal pleasures, and that's the thing that's driving us, that's the thing that motivates us, is not going to allow us to actually get to the place that the Most High will actually have for us, right? So when we look at the Nazarite vow, when we look at the picture that it paints for us, it's showing us really who we actually what we should be striving for, as followers of Yeshua, not just doing what we're able to do and get by doing it, but moving beyond that and excelling, really being successful and victorious in our self-denial. And also we see the physical expression of our set apartness. We're not secret, set apart ones, right? There should be a physical expression. It should be a physical representation of your holiness. Just like when we look at the Nazarite, he was walking around and he had, if he was a man, he had like this huge, well, considering the amount of time that he was doing the vow. If he was doing it for a long time, he would have had a huge beard and he would have had a huge head of hair. If it was a woman who, was doing the vow, her head wrap would that thing would look like a big, huge pillar on her head, right? She got so much hair stuffed up in that thing, right? So we see a connection with this physical expression of the set apartness, not just being kind of this secret undercover person. When we think about, in our day and age, we have these kinds of folks who, you're holy, maybe when you're around holy people, right? But when you're around regular people, you might be regular, right? So, looking at this gives us the idea, the thought process of actually having a physical expression, actually letting it actually be a visible thing, your set apartness. And not even family can get in between this, right? Family wasn't able to be the thing that separated you from, your expression for the thing that you have chosen to do, that you actually promised to do. It goes along with the thing that Yeshua said. If you're not able to deny your father and mother and your sister and your brother, hate is what he said. It's very strong language that's used in regards to your connection to these people who are your physical family, right? You can't allow your physical family even to get in between this relationship that you have promised to the Most High. The things that are closest to you on this earth can make themselves be the furthest thing away from you if they are getting in between you and the Creator, right? And this is a picture that we can see with the vow of the Nazarene. So, coming to a close here, we want to look at connections in the apostolic writings. Yochanan the Immerser.
Yeah, he definitely took it to the next level, eating them locusts.
The Nazarite. Luke 1:13 through 17. Can you read that real quick?
And the messenger said unto him, Fear not, Zacharias, for thy supplication was heard, and thy wife Elizabeth shall bear a son to thee, and thou shalt call his name John, or Yochanan, for there shall be joy to thee and gladness, and many at his birth shall joy, for he shall be great before Yahweh, and wine and strong drink he may not drink, and of the Holy Spirit he shall be full, even from his mother's womb. And many of the sons of Israel he shall turn to Yahweh the Elohim, and he shall go before him in the spirit and the power of Elijah, to turn the hearts of the fathers to children, and disobedient ones to the wisdom of the righteous ones, to make ready for Yahweh a people prepared.
Okay. So when we look at John the Baptist, Yochanan, the immerser, right, and the prophecy that was given, in terms of, you know, his duty, his purpose in life, um, particular restraints, things that he was to abstain from in his life, right? And that's just not, it talks about, it said here, it said, and wine and strong drink he may not drink. Kind of doesn't put an end point
He's just not
on it.
Ever.
He's just not allowed to do it ever, which, as we saw before, is one of the prohibitions for the Nazarite vow. He had a special set apartness that was put on him, a job that he had to perform from before he came out of the womb. So we're thinking about this idea here of this Nazarite 2.0. Nazarite 2.0. When you look at the prophecy of Yochanan and his life's task and purpose, it's like unto that of us now as followers of Messiah. Followers of Messiah. We as followers of Messiah really have this kind of a task and a purpose on our lives that's like unto Yochanan, which is like unto the vow of the Nazarite, one who has made a particular decision, one who has made a particular life's choice. In our case, it's being followers of Yeshua. And with that life's choice, there are things that we must do. There are things that apply to us. There are ways upon which we must live our lives. And these things are directly connected to the decision and the choice and the promise that we've made. And when we look at Yochanan, it says that he went forth in the spirit and power of Elijah. Right? So what did that entail? Right? To turn the hearts of the fathers back to the children. What does that mean when you think about the idea of turning the hearts of the fathers back to the children?
Start connecting them back to the promise that Yahweh made with Abraham and Isaac and Jacob.
I would say that that's definitely involved in it, but yes, absolutely, that's it. But I think specifically when you think about the hearts of the fathers back to the children, when you think about the relationship between the father and his children, we're thinking about the idea of the heritage, of the lineage, of the carrying on of the heritage, the carrying on of the lineage. How do you allow the lineage to keep going forward? Right? By bringing the people of Yahweh back to the Father, back to Yahweh, by spreading the gospel of Messiah, right? The thing that institutes the new covenant, the thing that brings about the regathering of Israel as a whole, right? That's dealing with the heritage of Yahweh, which would be the heritage of Israel, which would be this idea of turning the hearts of the fathers back to the children, not having the heritage stop and end and just die with you, right? But carrying on and growing and and going from father to son to infinity. The disobedient to an attitude of righteousness, right? Which I think is more than just when we think about an attitude of righteousness. When we think about an attitude of righteousness, we're thinking about kind of a thought process coming from internal, something that's internal, that's moving out. Righteousness, right? When we think about something that's internal, that's moving out, in the idea of this whole, we're talking about the spirit and power of Elijah. This is the thing that is doing. So when we think about this in terms of the attitude of righteousness, we're talking about the Ruach HaKodesh on the inside of us, right? That's changing our attitudes. It's changing our appetites. It's changing our desires and causing us to move out in righteousness and walk in righteousness, right? It's taking us from a state of being disobedient to righteousness, but not only that, but changing our hearts and our mind and moving us into this attitude and giving us power to walk this out.
It's not like you're just bumping into it.
Right. Or just doing righteous things. Or not just doing righteous things, but having this attitude of righteousness. Right. And by doing all of this, you're making ready a people. You're making ready a people prepared for the Most High, prepared for the coming of the King, right? Making ready a people who are prepared for the return of Messiah, right? When we look at what John was doing, he was making a way for the coming of Yeshua, right? And we are doing the exact same thing. We too are making ready a people, a bride ready for the bridegroom to come and to marry his bride, right? So when we look at this thing that Yochanan, the immerser / Nazarite, has done, we can look at, his job, his purpose, his duty, and that's our duty. Our duty is the same as his, right? And we see that exemplified through the vow of the Nazarite.
I saved.
Oh, it's a typo. I said all that just to say this. We as followers of Yeshua, right? We see a example of how we are to live our lives through the Nazarite vow. We see the example of someone who, his entire life was dedicated to ushering in the return, the arrival of Messiah. And, as followers of Yeshua, we really, have to align ourselves with, this thought process, with this lifestyle, with this attitude, the one that Yochanan had, right? So when we, walk around in this life, not simply doing, that which is minimally required of us, but going above and beyond,
yeah.
Right? When we walk through this life, we can't be allowing our carnal desires to move us, to be the thing that dictates us and motivates us, right? We're not trying to be some this holy person just for the sake of holiness, right? But again, we're doing all of this unto Yahweh. We're doing all this as a service to Yahweh, to the one who was able to bring us out of utter darkness into his marvelous light.
I think that when people keep the Torah from a standpoint of looking at commandments, it can be easier to get that whole what do I minimally have to do thought process, because you're trying to live according to a list. And that's why we have to, move past that to getting to a point where we're trying to be pleasing to the Most High, and that's why we're keeping the Torah, and that's why we're that's why we are on this walk and on this path,
Yeah.
Because if we're keeping it according to a list, then the question is, what do you minimally have to do? That's a valid kind of a question.
Yeah.
But if you're actually striving and seeking to be pleasing to the Most High,
the list doesn't matter.
The list doesn't matter. Exactly.
It's not the motivator.
That's not the motivator behind why you're doing what you're doing. And the other thing I got from this lesson today, I got a lot from it, was that like how the Nazarite, well, actually I have two things. When you become a believer in Mashiach, when you become a believer in Yeshua, it's kind of like you're taking upon yourself something that you can't necessarily expect other people to live according to. They're not going to understand you and what you're doing because they're on the outside looking in.
Mm-hmm.
So just like, if you was a Nazarite, well, other people in the community could do certain things. They could drink wine. They could drink grape juice. There's nothing wrong with drinking wine or eating grapes. But because you made this vow, now you can't do that.
Mm-hmm.
There's not a judgment against anybody else. It's just because you made this commitment. Now, I think the same thing when we need to have grace with other people that, they're gonna, Yah permitting, they're gonna come into the faith, but we can't hold them to a standard that they didn't choose to make on their own. That makes any sense. I mean, I'm not talking about like people who are murderers or anything. I'm just talking about people who aren't, maybe they're not keeping the Shabbat. Maybe they don't have that understanding yet. But at the same time, they didn't make a commitment to doing it. You did, so you need to do it to the best of your ability. And as maybe someone who's on, the outside of that, when they see it, they can ask questions and maybe they'll make that commitment as well. And that'll be part of you turning the hearts to the hearts of the fathers to the children.
Well, I would say that, I think that another thing that we see with the Nazarite vow is with the promise that you're making, it's understood what's involved in the promise.
Okay.
Right? So with the promise that you're making, it's understood what is included in the promise.
Yeah.
So it's one thing for me to look at somebody who hasn't decided to follow after Yeshua, mm-hmm. and then try to judge them for something that is what I would consider a requirement, mm-hmm. As a follower of Yeshua. I can't look at that person and expect for them actually to live the way that the scriptures prescribe for them to live, mm-hmm. because they've never made the choice. But I think there's a difference between that person and one who has made the choice,
Yeah.
who, you know, needs to be brought to the realization that the choice, with the choice that you've made, there are things that are attached to the promise.
Yeah.
And I think that's the part that gets lost,
Yeah.
as to where people are making a promise, but they don't know what's attached to the promise that they begin to make. So that's another thing I would just add to what you had said, is that there is a distinction, I would say, between, you know, those on the outside and those who claim to be on the inside. If you claim to be on the inside, understand, with the promise that you've made, that promise being to make Yeshua your Lord and Master. With that promise, there are instructions and things that are attached to the promise. And, you know,
well, that would be kind of like if somebody decided to take a Nazarite vow and they decided that they wanted to drink some wine,
yeah,
something like
right.
that. You would be like, okay, you made the Nazarite vow,
right,
so you can't drink any wine.
exactly.
So,
Okay, so are there any other thoughts and comments about anything that we talked about? Questions, comments,
Well,
anything that
you hear me?
thought was comment worthy?
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Okay. Oh, did he?
Oh,
Oh, wait a second. Is this?
There's no audio. No audio.
yeah, man. I've been trying to comment all day.
What?
we didn't hear you.
That's crazy.
But it's all good.
I had to. You was able to hear me, but I couldn't hear you though, huh?
Yeah. I even turned the video on, was waving my hands.
Man, I had the sound turned down. I didn't even noticed that till just now. Okay, so is there anything you could think about that you was trying to say earlier?
Nah, don't worry about it.
Okay. All right, I'm gonna have to add that to my list of checkoffs.
Your checklist.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, but I just think that really just coming out from focusing on a list of things to, like, it seemed like that was a Nazarite vow is basically making yourself an offering to Yahweh.
Yes.
So instead of you taking an animal and offering it up on your behalf, you're kind of offering your own self up.
Yes, and the other thing that it also did, which was different than the priesthood, to compare the two, the priest actually was really a servant. The priest really was a spiritual servant to the people, as to where the Nazarite really was just a servant unto Yahweh. It wasn't about the people. It was about his own kind of relationship.
He didn't carry the weight of Israel on his shoulders.
Right. He just carried his own weight
on his shoulders.
Right. So then when we look forward, when we move that forward into comparing it with Yochanan and seeing as to where it wasn't just about his own personal self-righteousness, but that was something that moved him forward in the nation, and was causing the nation to also seek and attain and desire righteousness. Right. So when we look at this so-called quote unquote Nazarite 2.0, where it goes from this thing that is basically something that's kind of an internal, localized, individual kind of a thing, as to where the remix of that is dealing with not only your own self, but those around you.
Changing the people that are there.
Right. Yes.
And Yochanan, he was from a priestly family, so.
Right. Yes, he was. Okay. All right. So that being said, I will go ahead and.
I got this one thing.
Okay. Go ahead. Let's hear it.
So the covenant that was made, it's a vow too, right?
Which covenant are you speaking of?
That they made before Yahweh with Moses.
Oh yeah. The Mosaic covenant you talking about?
Right.
Yeah.
So I mean, the Nazarene vow is, just seems to be more strict, and but the covenant that was made, that our ancestors made, was supposed to be kept forever. And so even like the people who came and wanted to, kind of like live amongst the Israelites had to basically practice as they did, right?
Yeah.
And so today you have, the Christians who believe that, they have been grafted in. They should be keeping the covenants as well, correct?
Yes.
So should we say that the Christians who are not keeping the covenant are not grafted in?
Well, what they're not doing is, again, we talked about vowing the vow of the Nazarite, which where you're talking about when you're talking about the promise, and you're talking about that which is connected to the promise, or what the promise as a noun and the promise as a verb. So again, when I think about the idea of joining myself to Yeshua, being a follower of Yeshua, that looks like something. That looks like something. It's not just about me saying I believe in Yeshua and then that's it. There's that looks a certain way. So when you say that you believe in Yeshua, when you say you are partaking in this new covenant, if you're not walking in righteousness, the thing that what he says is righteousness, you're not fulfilling the promise. So essentially, it's the same thing as if we was to look at a Nazarite who was to say, "I'm going to take the vow of the Nazarite," and they got. Every time you see them, they're eating grapes.
and raisins.
Every time you see that individual who said that he was going to be doing a certain thing, when you see him, he's doing things that don't coincide with what he said, which in fact nullifies everything, right? And which according to the command, is a sin. When you make the vow and you break the vow, a sin is committed because of the defilement, right? When you become defiled by a dead body, a sin occurred, and guilt is put upon you. So likewise, when we look at those who say that they are believers in Yeshua, and yet they are not loving Yahweh the way he said to love me, which is, if you love me, he said, keep my commandments, right? The expression of love towards the Most High is doing what he said to do.
And it wouldn't be grievous.
Yeah. And it's not grievous unto you.
So that's the discipline aspect, because remember you talked about if somebody just gives up wine and all they do is think about the wine,
right,
it's making it grievous unto them.
Right. But we talking about following after Yahweh, doing the things that he said to do, and doing the things that he said to do, and in the doing of it, it's a pleasure for you to do it. Right. So if I'm saying that I'm a follower of Yeshua, but I'm trying to figure out how I can get out of doing all of these things that it says in the book that he's supposed to be doing. In all actuality, right? You can't say that person's actually a follower.
Well,
I don't know how you say it anyway. Go ahead.
What does commandment mean in that scripture, like the Greek?
You talking about John 14?
Yeah.
In the Greek, it's probably gonna be like nomos or something. Let me look. That is John 14:15, right? John 14:15. That word is in the Greek. It's not nomos. It's let's see. It's entole, injunction, authoritative prescription, commandment, precept.
Is that did you go back to? Is that in the season Septuagint at all?
That actually is
That only in any time.
no, I'm just saying in terms of John 14:15. If you love me, keep my commandments. That word is prescription, commandment, precept, injunction. So let's see, what is that? G 1785. Hold on a second. Let's do some looking here. Greek New Testament. (1785) injunction or commandment. Okay, so let's do this. We can look and do this. We can say if we look up the word commandment in this takes a couple minutes to be going around looking at this. If we say, what is this here? According to the commandment, let's pay. Let's see if we can just find one that's translated as talking about the Torah specifically. Even though when we so let's just do this. If you say, for instance, Numbers 4:37, where it says, these were they that were numbered of the families of the Kohites, all that might do service in the tabernacle of the congregation, which Moses and Aaron did number according to the commandment of Yahweh by the hand of Moses. That word is pay, which is mouth. So it's talking about what Yahweh mouthed.
Came from his mouth.
Right? So let's just look at that. So let's just look at that word there. Came from his 63:10, 37. What was our word? 1785.
Bab.
1785 is definitely used in the Old Testament. 1785 is definitely used in the Old Testament.
Which word do you say it? Which verse do you say it using?
I was just looking at Leviticus chapter 4, verse 22.
Leviticus 4 and 22.
30 or 22, yeah. When it talks about
the commandments of Yahweh.
The commandments of Yahweh.
Oh, yeah, it's right there.
That's 22 or 17.
That's Entole. So, I mean, there's different words that are used for commandments. The idea of it is the law, statutes, and commandments, the words that Yahweh spoke. It says it in different ways. Like that's an example. Leviticus 44 and 22 is using that same Greek word that's used in John 14 and 15 is using that same Greek word that's translated as commandments, is using the same word talking about the commandments of Yahweh in the Old Testament. To me, it's hard to look at the word commandment in the Greek and try to say that means something other than what you think it means. It's hard. It's hard.
Wait, you blurred out on that section. We'll say that again.
I'm saying that when you look at the word commandments in the Greek, it's hard to look at that word and think that it means something other than what you would think that it means, which is the commandments of Yahweh. Whether it's talking about the commandments, the precepts, the words that he spoke.
Because Yahshua, I mean, he didn't lay out no other commandments that was contrary to what.
No.
Yeah.
No, if anything, he tightens the rope in terms as opposed to loosening it, right? If he went from saying forget about you going and actually being with another man's wife. If you think about doing it, you've done it. If you hate somebody, you murdered them, right? So if anything, he's elevating the Torah and not diminishing it, right? So if we was gonna say there was a thing called the commandments of Christ or whatever it is that they say, I don't want those because they're harder than the other ones. If I had the choice, you know what I mean? If I was going to try to say that there was a difference between the two, if I was going to try to make that argument, the things that Yeshua is saying is more stringent than what we see in the Torah.
And it seems like he was tightening the noose because they were trying to find these little loopholes to, you know what I mean, do this little tricky stuff with the law.
Right.
So, you know, I think that's why he tightened it. Like, hold on.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
So again, even when we see that, we can see the parallel between the Nazarite vow and just like a regular individual, where you're making your life more holy. You're going above and beyond. You're doing more than what is just naturally required of you. You're going a step higher. So if we was going to make the argument and say that there is this thing called the commandments of Christ, right? Those things are like unto the Nazarite vow, as to where they, you know, if there is such a thing, I'm saying if there is such a thing, I don't believe there's a distinction, but I'm saying if you're going to make the argument I'm saying that that's taking you to an even higher level.
Right. And so basically the gist is that, you know, when you claim Yeshua, you know, you are supposed to adhere to a certain style of living and a certain way of doing things. Like it's no, like, you know, people talk about this freedom in Christ and all of this different things. You know, that don't mean just do what you want to do. So, so it's almost like the, you know, taking a vow of the Nazarite.
Right.
You know, you can drink grapes and stuff, and maybe even have somebody feed them to you. You know what I mean? But but there's still commandments that you need to follow.
Right. It
It's
looks
just like if you join any group, any club, or any team, you know what I mean. There's things that you got to do.
Right.
You know, there's ways of doing things, and it seems like Christianity these days is the only thing where you can come in and be all willy nilly. Oh, like, oh, I don't believe that. You know, this I can eat pork and you know all this stuff. Yeah. All right, that's all I wanted to say.
Right. Exactly. So again, what seems to happen is people are stepping into a contract
They don't understand
when they never read it.
They
never read the contract. They just signed at the bottom, but they never read the stipulation.
That's a great way of putting it. Yes, you're entering into a contract and you didn't read the fine print.
Yeah. Right.
But that's what a lot of us do, though. You know,
Right.
we be signing stuff and signing our lives away.
Yeah. Right. Exactly. Yeah. Okay. All right. So that being said, we're gonna go ahead and end this broadcast for now. Anybody watching this on YouTube, remember to subscribe to the channel. We want you to click on the little notification bell. Make sure you find out when our lessons and studies are coming out. We're trying to put out new things weekly. So again, go ahead and click that subscription button at the bottom, and we will see you next time.